Judith Judy Weaver. Judith Judy Weaver, who was working at the Belnesque Cafe in Everett, Washington, on a sunny June night in 1984, disappeared from sight. Her brutally murdered body was found in her apartment the following morning, leading to a mystery that would plague her loved ones for almost 40 years. Up until the police discovered a man with a troubled background thanks to a breakthrough in DNA technology, reopening a case that was previously deemed to be unsolvable. Born and reared in the little town of Everett, Washington, Judy Weaver's life began there. Judy was well liked in her hometown because of her kind smile and amiable disposition. Judy's grace and charm were evident when she was crowned the queen of a local beauty competition at the age of 17. Along with her mother, Edith Perot, she co-owned the Belnesque Cafe on Hewitt Avenue in 1984. She devoted her life to provide for her family. Judy's presence at the popular local cafe gave it a personal touch that patrons valued. She collaborated with her mother and Kathy Myers, her daughter, to turn the Belnesque into a true family company. As a streetwise and careful person, Judy was known to keep a revolver in the cafe's basement as protection as she tallied the till. She made sure her loved ones' safety was her top priority and that she was fiercely protective of them. Being a single mother, Judy's two daughters, Kathy Myers and Colleen Kaiser, were the focal point of her family life. They loved their mother and saw her as an inspiration. Judy was excited about what lay ahead, eager to meet her future grandkids and relishing the pleasure of seeing her daughters blossom. When Levi was 4 months old, she got to know him, the eldest grandchild. There were signs at the Belnesque announcing that it was a boy's birth. Sadly, Judy's life and the lives of others who knew her would go down a sad path. Judy worked at the Belnesque Cafe in Everett, Washington's downtown on June 1st, 1984. The popular local holiday known as Salty Sea Days was coming to an end, and the city was a flurry of activity. Judy completed her shift at the cafe as dusk was drawing near, and she began her daily walk home. Locals in Everett were probably enjoying the last bits of the celebrations in the streets. Judy went to the Dairy Queen, which is conveniently located near her Rucker Avenue apartment, as she usually did. Most likely, she placed an order for a serving of vanilla ice cream, a common indulgence. Later on, a witness claimed to have seen Judy there with a young man who they thought could have known her. It seemed little at the moment, but this stop would be the last time Judy Weaver was seen alive. On June 2nd, just after midnight, a bystander saw smoke emanating from Judy's apartment. She resided in an apartment in a brick, one-story structure with 5 units at the intersection of 35th Street and Rucker Avenue. The Everett Fire Department was informed of the fire by the bystander, who used a payphone to dial 911. There was a sense of urgency and heavy black smoke as the firefighters arrived. They discovered something awful as soon as they walked into Judy's apartment. Judy had suffered a severe beating and was discovered in her bedroom, bound with a phone cable. Her garments had been sliced off with a knife, and she had been strangled. The bedroom was the only area where the fire, which was started with a paper towel in a Pond's cold cream jar, had spread. However, it was obvious that their goal was to hide the attack and murder. Her apartment's back door was unlocked, indicating that her attacker may have entered through it. Judy's body was discovered by firefighters who had to crawl into the smoke-filled bedroom to get to her. Judy's family was distraught and the community was stunned by the crime's severity. Her daughters, Kathy and Colleen, had to deal with their mother's abrupt and violent death, which sent them into a nightmare. The killing became widely known, bringing a pall over the city and announcing the beginning of a protracted and difficult investigation. Following Judy's horrible murder, the Everett police immediately began a thorough investigation to identify her attacker. Among the first detectives on the site were Gary Woodburn and Pete Grassi, who worked non-stop to piece out what had transpired. The fire, which was intentionally started to hide the crime, had only partially succeeded, and the crime was especially horrible. It left detectives with just enough proof to realize how serious and vicious the attack was. At first, the investigators were hopeful that the forensic evidence taken from the site would help them identify the offender. They took samples from the plat, such as the butt of a cigarette and a piece of carpet. In an attempt to locate a match in DNA databases, the samples were transferred to State Patrol crime analysts. However, the case almost instantly stalled. The leads they had suddenly dried up, and the DNA samples did not match anyone in the current databases. Detectives subsequently canvassed the area and spoke with witnesses again, but no one was able to offer any significant new information. No one ever identified the young man who was allegedly seen with Judy at the Dairy Queen, and there was no indication that he was connected to anyone she knew. Despite Judy's well-known status in the community, no one was able to come forward with any information that would have pointed to a suspect. The case was abandoned after several years. Pete Grassi, who had conducted the initial investigation into the incident, went over the evidence again in 2002 in the hopes that new developments in forensic technology would yield fresh leads. After further analysis, the DNA from the carpet and the cigarette butt could be read, yielding a readable strand. The main suspect at the time was exonerated, since the DNA did not match. Once more, there was no match for the DNA in any law enforcement database. Thus, investigators were left without a workable suspect. The Everett police, especially those who had been involved from the start, were very frustrated with the investigation becoming cold. In 2009, Grassi declared that there was nothing more to be done. Unless a fresh tip materialized, or DNA technology progressed to the point where it might identify the offender, detectives thought the case might never be solved. Judy's daughters never lost faith and persisted in demanding answers even as her family dealt with the grief of her unsolved murder. It hung over the Everett town as a cold case for almost 40 years. But a big discovery in 2024 managed to completely dissect the case. The breakthrough was made possible by forensic technology advancements and Everett detective Susan Logofetti's tenacity. When Logofetti and her group went through the case files earlier this year, they paid particular attention to the DNA evidence that had been taken from the crime scene. A ligature used to bind Judy and DNA profiles discovered on pantyhose were two of the most important pieces of evidence. Over the years, these DNA samples had been screened several times through the National DNA Database CODIS, but no matches had been found. However, since the initial samples were gathered, technology had developed dramatically, and investigators were optimistic that a fresh examination might provide answers. Then they had a suspect, but they still required a fresh sample of his DNA. To find out the gum company representative's favorite flavors, Logofetti and other undercover cops pretended to be representatives of the gum firm. The investigators observed the suspect chewing gum in front of them and collected several pieces. They placed the gathered gum in a ramekin and submitted it to be compared with the victim's DNA. A 66-year-old man called Mitchell Gaff, who has a long history of predatory aggression against women, was identified by the DNA profiles. Gaff had been residing in Olympia, Washington, going by Sam Wise Price, his legal alias. As a Level 3 offender, he poses a significant risk of reoffending. His violent and long criminal record included a prior conviction that revealed a pattern of him tying women up before attacking them. Once the match was confirmed, all officers responded promptly. On May 1st, 2024, they discovered Gaff in Olympia and took him into custody. He was charged with several offenses including first-degree assault, first-degree arson, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree burglary, and finally, the murder of Judy Weaver. He was taken into the Snohomish County Jail. When investigators attempted to speak with Gaff, who had a history of dodging justice by changing his legal name and relocating, he invoked his right to silence. Despite his silence, the DNA evidence established a strong connection and strengthened the case against him. The breakthrough in Judy's case demonstrated the value of forensic scientific advancements and law enforcement's dedication to cracking even the most difficult cases. Mitchell Gaff's arrest, which came about after almost 40 years, provided some closure to a family and a community that had been left waiting far too long for answers. Judy's family experienced a range of emotions following her arrest. Even though Judy would never return, The prospect of justice offered them the sense of satisfaction they had long yearned for. Years ago, Kathy Myers, Judy's daughter, had stated that while there would be no reunion with her mother, there would be closure. Gaff made an appearance in the Snohomish County courtroom on Monday, May 6, 2024. His plea to the charges was not guilty. There is no bail set for him. The start of his trial is set for June 21st. If found guilty as accused, Gaff's sentence will be life in prison. Moving on to the next case. Darlene Zetterauer. Born in Savannah, Georgia, to Wilma Joyce and Robert Charles Zetterauer, Darlene Zetterauer possessed an indestructible kinship with Barbara Susan Schreiber, affectionately referred to as Barbie. The two daughters were the definition of friendship. Born in 1961, only a few months apart. After completing their 8th grade education at Attucks Middle School, they were eager to begin their much-anticipated summer vacation in Hollywood, Florida. The teens, Barbara and Darlene, told Barbara's mother they were going to spend the night at their friend Valerie's house when they left their Hollywood home on the tragic evening of June 18, 1975. There are contradictory tales regarding the specifics of their movements that evening. But according to the majority of tales, they visit Darlene's close friend Gail's house. In 1975, on a bright June day, 14-year-olds Barbara Schreiber and Darlene Zetterauer wandered through their Hollywood neighborhood. They stopped at the intersection of Northwest 40th Street and Sterling Road on a bench. The last confirmed witness to the best friend's whereabouts, Gail, remembers clearly seeing them sitting together on a busy Hollywood street bench close to the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Route 441. Her recollections of Darlene depict a vibrant, carefree girl with an unusual finger-style hair pullback. Neither of the girls drove or owned a car, like many other young people of their era. They frequently relied on hitchhiking to get to their destinations because they lacked access to their own vehicles. Laughter filled the air during the carefree summer days before high school for the three of them. However, Gail remembers that fateful day when a white van unexpectedly pulls up next to the bench. Gail watched as both females climbed into the white van voluntarily. Their fate was decided when the door closed. Darlene and Barbara were bold, gregarious girls, unlike Gail. Gail's father was strict and would not have let her get into a stranger's van, even though she longed to go on their adventures with them. Gail ultimately made the decision to remain. Because that was the final time Darlene and Barbara were seen alive, it was this astute parental wisdom that eventually saved Gail's life. Darlene and Barbara disappeared without a word. The cause of this horrific kidnapping remained a perplexing enigma. Then, early on June 19, 1975, two teenage girls' lifeless bodies were discovered by a family out fishing. Darlene and Barbara were there. They were lying side by side by the canal, a startling sight that paralleled Highway 27 about 4 miles north of Andytown, a long-gone trucker outpost. Investigators uncovered a startling reality. The significant amount of blood at the scene indicated that both individuals had died from a gunshot wound, most likely from a high-caliber bullet, maybe a .45. According to the blood spatter study, both females met their tragic end in the location of their bodies. Regarding how dressed they were, different stories surfaced. Some said they were completely clothed, while others alluded to something more darker. Before the deadly massacre, they were both cruelly coerced. The last person to see the girls alive, Gail, conveyed her concern to the media when their bodies were found. She related that she was afraid for them. "I had no idea what the situation was. I'm glad I refrained from going into that uncharted territory with them." Gail said seriously, "I believe the person behind this was just a sick individual." The community was plagued by a great deal of ambiguity regarding what transpired before Barbara and Darlene's terrible deaths. After conducting a preliminary inquiry, the investigators found Valerie, the purported host of the scheduled sleepover, who disclosed a startling reality. The teenagers had never planned to stay the night together. It was a trick that Barbara and Darlene frequently pulled off when they wanted to go out and do things without their parents knowing. Witness statements led Broward County investigators to believe the females may have been trying to hitch a ride north, maybe in search of illegal drugs. The innocence and youth of the victims garnered enormous support from the community and media, but the absence of contemporary technology presented unsurmountable obstacles for detectives trying to apprehend the elusive offender. It was a very difficult case from the beginning because there were no leads and no technologies to follow their movements. The case was abandoned. Andrew Giannino, a detective with the Broward County Sheriff's Office, was burdened with the case for many years. Tens of thousands of Broward Sheriff's Office detectives, deputies, crime scene investigators, and forensic experts were used in the relentless search for justice. Decades later, their persistent efforts to find the truth about the unsolved case paid off. The Broward Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit assumed command in early 2023. They were greeted with piles of reports, many pictures of the crime scene, evidence boxes, and Barbara and Darlene's outfits. BSO Crime Scene Unit Detective Roberto Casares carefully dissected Darlene's clothes, extracting DNA from the fibers. The result of this painstaking process was what the investigators had been waiting for almost 50 years. It took the cold case team almost 50 years of failed efforts to retrieve the suspect's full DNA profile. Armed with this discovery, detectives dug through databases for a long time before finding a match. By using his biological artifacts, the cold case unit was able to establish a clear connection that led to the lead suspect in the case being identified as Robert Clark Keebler. The disclosure provided a glimmer of hope following years of agonizing ambiguity, bringing Barbara and Darlene one step closer to justice. Investigating Robert Clark Keebler's past revealed an alarming pattern of violent assault, forced sex, and armed robbery from South Florida to California. Officials declared Keebler dead in South Florida in 2019, ending any possibility of direct responsibility. Still, the families of the victims continued to demand answers. After conducting a thorough investigation, Detective Giannina came to the conclusion that Robert Clark Keebler had driven Barbara and Darlene to the remote Everglades, where he had brutally attacked them before shooting them. He had not been connected to the case prior to the DNA testing. A new line of investigation opens up as the case comes to a satisfying conclusion. Investigators are currently closely examining the potential link between Keebler and the unresolved South Florida flat tire killing cases. Detectives are still searching the past for hints, hoping to find DNA evidence that connects these crimes to the tragic events of Barbara and Darlene. Darlene and Barbara were robbed of the opportunity to live life to the fullest, and will always be remembered by those who loved them and their families. Their experiences serve as a painful reminder of lives cut short, of potential never realized, of a tragedy recorded in history, and of the need for justice and answers that might possibly be discovered by community contributions and collective memory. Moving on to the next case. Emerson School Remains. Emerson School, founded in Sanford, Maine, had seen many prosperous years. However, over a century ago, it was set to be replaced due to declining student enrollment. After going through its system, generations moved on. When the school property was sold in 2017, the Cumberland Farms network of convenience stores and a petrol station were to replace it. Playing football and baseball and running about the playground, the kids had no idea what was sleeping peacefully beneath the Earth's surface. Construction workers discovered a collapsing casket on May 4, 2017, when they were excavating for a gas station water pipe. They were shocked to discover human bones after more excavating because the location had long been close to a school. Who would bury someone near the school like that? Authorities found teeth, ribs, jawbone, and finger bones. It was difficult to determine if the remains were male or female because the pelvic bone was missing, but medical experts estimated that the child, who was 10 years old, was female. Police also discovered 6 nickel-plated handles, the coffin's keys, and the decaying remnants of a stunning old wooden coffin. Although the place was initially thought to be a possible crime scene, Major Matt Gain of the Sanford Police Department determined it was an old graveyard. The Sanford community had previously discovered ancient bones. When excavating the town hall's elevator shaft in the 1980s, they discovered a leg bone that proved to be extremely ancient. Experts determined the body was over a century old because the coffin is from the Victorian era. The gas station construction was put on hold when something so unusual and enigmatic was discovered. The laborious process of meticulously excavating the grave followed. Peter Smith, the foreman of the construction workers, was with Stephen Buck, the city manager at the time, while he meticulously picked through the soil by hand. Paul Auger, a local historian and member of the board of directors of the Sanford Springvale Historical Society, also joined them. Being an aficionado, Auger declared the location to be a historical excavation as soon as the coffin was found. At the time, the mayor gave them a longer time to thoroughly extract all of the important pieces of evidence. Since the pieces were fragile due to age, his son, Andrew Auger, assisted in carefully recovering every one of them without causing any damage. Everything was recorded as they laboriously painted away glass shards, metal fragments, and mud and dirt-caked bones. The Sanford Springvale Historical Society states that the single-pane glass window on top of the casket was typical of the Victorian era. The coffin was framed as though it were in a fairy tale by the roots of an oak tree nearby. Hairs from the roots grew into the casket and are still there. Every bone and artifact, including the 2 coffin keys and a piece of gingham cloth, had labels attached to them. A gingham fabric is a type of checkered fabric that was most likely used for a dress. Officials decided it was only fitting to identify the person buried in the coffin before reburying its remnants. The costs of the DNA testing that would be carried out in an effort to identify the deceased were partially covered by the money received from the sale of Emerson School. High school history teacher Paul Auger's students offered their assistance in the identification procedure. Even with more help, the procedure did not become any simpler. Paul Auger spearheaded the cause. However, the state medical examiner's office was of no service in identifying the remains. The local city council authorized funds after Mayor Tom Coate gave the digging first priority. Mayor Becky Brink would thereafter remain a supporter of the project. The excavation process took a long time. Using a special sifter made for the purpose by the proprietor of a nearby Shaw's hardware store, Paul and his son Andrew searched for more bones. They discovered fragments of a mandible with teeth, ribs, vertebrae, and sections of a skull. Usually, teeth make victim identification easy, but dental records weren't available at the time. The teeth are nevertheless useful for DNA evidence. Using chopsticks and gentle toothbrushes with bristles, the dirt and root hairs that covered the bones were removed, and the area was then carefully cleaned with water. After cleaning, the human remains at the Carl Heald and Black Funeral Home were arranged on an examining table. By this time, images, maps, and records from 1889 revealed to the public that the school grounds had once been Woodlawn Cemetery. Thomas Goodall had already bought the site where the New Cumberland Farm Store was being built before 1889. The Goodall Mansion across the street belonged to Thomas Goodall, the founder of Goodall Mills in the 1870s. The cemetery is next to Emerson School, which was once Sanford's high school. Around 1900, the community started moving burials from the cemetery to provide room for the Emerson School, which was constructed in 1901 and welcomed students in 1902. When the 1920s saw the construction of Willard School, it became a high school, while Emerson became an elementary school. The tombs were in danger of decaying at the turn of the 20th century, so Oakdale Cemetery agreed to take them, freeing up room for Emerson School's playground. 77 bodies were excavated and reburied at Oakdale, according to city records. By 1933, the location was sufficiently obvious for Emerson School to acquire the property. On September 17, 1971, the Sanford Tribune and Advocate newspaper had a front-page story that said, 300 Emerson school children cheer as town officials convert Woodlawn Cemetery into playground. Paul Auger remembered childhood tales of kids boasting that they could play baseball with gravestones as third base, but these were more than simply fiction. They could only conclude that the remains, which were arranged at Carl Heald and Black Funeral Home, were the bones of a small child. However, it took 6 arduous years to identify the so-called Woodlawn Cemetery doe. Preliminary DNA testing validated the medical examiner's observations. The bones did not belong to a small child, as they had first thought, but rather to a lady. Hopefully, enough DNA signatures from the deceased's teeth would be available to identify the family to which this person belonged. A genetic profile was uploaded with assistance from Major Gagne to the then public database known as GEDmatch. After a number of years, in the spring of 2022, Paul Auger eventually got in touch with the DNA Doe Project. The goal of the DNA Doe Project was to identify nameless dead so that the departed might be buried with the approval of their loved ones. This could solve puzzles or reunite families with the bodies of their own kin. The DNA Doe Project's Jennifer Randolph got deeply involved in the hunt for the missing connection, and the entire process accelerated as a result. They gave Parabon Nanolabs the DNA sample collection. Virginia's Parabon Nano Labs had recently established a relatively new forensic genealogy wing. While there were plenty of matches, the majority were not conclusive. Ultimately, the lab's investigative genetic genealogists used bioinformatics to identify the unidentified remains by creating a family tree from her great-great-niece and nephew. 3 intriguing candidates were identified: a maternal third cousin, 3 times removed, a paternal half-great-great-niece, and a paternal half-great-great-nephew. The daughters of Ferdinand and Lois Patton were located thanks to the DNA Doe Project, which connected their family members and created a family tree. The obituary of first Edith Patton in the Biddeford Daily Journal on November 12, 1891, was the actual puzzle piece that helped put everything together. At that point, everything started to fit together. An 1870 census found that Ferdinand and Lois Patton lived in Fairfield, in Somerset County, in the state of Maine. 2 of their daughters, Edith, age 3, and Alfreda, age 2, were mentioned. Both were born on 1867. Edith was raised in Fairfield throughout her early years. Her brother, Landell, was also born in 1872. While her father worked at a sawmill, 13-year-old Edith was hired as a live-in housekeeper in Lewiston during the 1880 census. According to court documents, Lois and Ferdinand Patton divorced in October 1880 following an alleged adultery charge. Ferdinand Patton twice remarried. In October 1880, he married Emma Dinsmore, his second wife. She died soon after their marriage, possibly shortly after his divorce, which resulted in a third marriage. In 1884, he married Agnes Avery for the 3rd time. The couple had 3 boys together. On 1899, the couple gave birth to a daughter in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Perhaps as an homage to his older sister Edith, Ferdinand named his daughter Edith May. Edith never got married or had kids, and neither did her siblings. Her sister Alfreda died in 1917, and her younger brother Landell Patton died in 1890. The death of Edith was announced in the Biddeford Daily Journal. The eventual cause of her death was TB consumption, a disease that killed 1 in 7 Americans during the 1800s epidemic. Edith was only 24 when she passed away in 1891. She was adored by a large group of friends who deeply regret her premature death, according to paraphrase the story. She was buried in a glass window coffin with nickel-plated handles because she was adored beyond measure. Edith Patton passed away at an early age, leaving little documents to document her life. When she relocated to Springvale is unknown. Not too long after Edith lost her life, her parents also passed away. However, Paul Auger surmised that she might have been employed at a shoe store, as was customary for women in that era. In Woodlawn Cemetery, many graves lack a gravestone or other marker to identify the deceased. Due to time and weather, many were in ruins. Now, 132 years after she was abandoned, Edith was found, given a proper burial, and her name was given thanks to technological developments. On March 1, 2023, the DNA Doe Project was able to identify her. The DNA Doe Project conducted a news conference to reveal her identity. The attendance at the Sanford press conference was more than it was at the 2021 press conference that named a victim of Chicago serial killer John Wayne Gacy, according to Jennifer Randolph of the DNA Doe Project. Randolph said that Edith's identification was evidence of the kindness of Sanford residents. She described the intricate procedure that resulted in Edith's identification. This required assessing strong matches, working with DNA in a database, and looking through a variety of records, including diaries, newspapers, and censuses. Looking through a local's diary, Randolph came across an important passage. Today was Edith Patton's last day. This finding gave the investigation a boost. Paul Auger located the corroborated obituary at the MacArthur Library in Biddeford. The Biddeford Journal announcement, dated November 25, 1891, stated Edith's acquaintances but left out information about her family. None of Edith's family members are interred at Sanford, according to Auger. They are all buried in the same Auburn, Maine cemetery. The city declared that Edith would have a memorial in her honor at Oak Hill Cemetery in Auburn, where she would be buried alongside her relatives. Thus, thanks to developments in DNA technology, Edith Patton was to be reunited with her family 132 years after she had been laid to rest. The most significant mystery to ever affect Sanford was solved. Moving on to the next case. Kelly Ann Workman. Everyone knew who the criminals were when Kelly Ann Workman was discovered, yet it took 35 years for someone to come forward and dare accuse the bullies responsible. Stanley and Joan Workman, farmers, welcomed Kelly Ann into the world in 1965. They lived in Seymour, Missouri's Douglas County. Stanley spent 19 years working at Dayco Corporate, but his true passion was farming and taking care of his dairy herd. Mark and Pam Workman were Kelly's two siblings. Ames Matthew Workman, her baby brother, died while still a baby. She was a peaceful, well-mannered kid who lived with her parents. She had blonde hair and green eyes. Kelly frequently performed yard and house maintenance for local Dogwood residents. For around 3 years, she manicured the Dogwood Cemetery's lawn. In this region, it was not unusual for a young lady to take care of a cemetery and for her to work late into the night. She was not afraid of the graveyard. However, it turned into a nightmare for her family on June 30th, 1989, when Kelly just vanished while working late into the night. Her parents thought she was a little late at first, but her parents were more worried as supper time drew near and Kelly was not to be seen. Their daughter was not usually out this late without warning. Shauna Beebe, Kelly's cousin, can still clearly recall the day Joan Workman, in a panic, ran to their house to inform Kelly's father and uncle that she was missing. The days that followed were characterized by an intensely emotional and chaotic moment. Family and friends came together, organizing search teams and clinging to hope as each hour went by. Their concern turned into worry, and they called the police. A massive search that covered Douglas County started. Kelly's last known sighting was at 5:40 p.m. while she was cutting the lawn at Douglas County's Dogwood Cemetery. This is close to her place of employment, the Southern Baptist Church, at the intersection of Z and Highway 14. Her uncle saw her working diligently, but by 6:15, he was unable to see her anymore, so she either departed or was taken somewhere else. Kelly's sister, Pam Workman, lived roughly 200 miles away in Kansas City, Missouri at the time. The 22-year-old was going about her day. She was unable to fathom the catastrophe that would befall her family. A knock on Pam's flat door on July 1st interrupted her morning routine. Her aunt and uncle were standing there, worried expressions on their faces. They brought the breaking news that Kelly was missing, which would change Pam's life irrevocably. Even though Pam's travel back to Douglas County wasn't very long, it seemed to go on forever. Every mile served as an agonizing reminder of her sister's absence and the family's impending uncertainty. The laborer family gathered in prayer and concern for Kelly's whereabouts for several days. The fact that barely 2/3 of the lawn had been mowed and Kelly's keys were in the ignition of the car was the most perplexing thing. The lawnmower was switched off but still fully fueled. She was interrupted, the detectives concluded, and was not to be robbed. It's possible she was abducted. Heartbreak overwhelmed the relief when Kelly was eventually located. Sadly for Kelly's family, a week after her kidnapping, her body was found. Kelly was 24 years old. Over 10 miles after her last sighting, in the Mark Twain National Forest near Oldfield, her body was found submerged in a creek. For two of Kelly's uncles who were present at the moment, the revelation was especially terrifying. Authorities were unable to pinpoint the precise cause of her death because of the speed at which her body decomposed. After taking an X-ray of her, they discovered no signs of a head injury or bullet wounds. They surmised that she had probably passed away on the evening of June 30th or July 1st. Pam frequently thought that the case of her sister was not given the attention it required. Her grief and annoyance were further exacerbated by this feeling of neglect. Still, optimism lingered. Bam held fast to the hope that justice will eventually be done. Not just for Kelly, but for all the families that suffer because of a cold case. Pam was adamant that Kellyanne was a victim of excessive knowledge. She may have heard something regarding illegal substances or money while working at Dogwood's store on certain days. This also provides motive. The offender felt compelled to silence her. Although Pam feels that the police did not do much, there was another issue with the investigation. They lacked the means to prosecute the 3 suspects they had. They provided alibis during the interrogation. During a conference on July 10, 1989, law enforcement officials acknowledged that they lacked physical leads in this case. Participants in the conference included members from the Missouri State Highway Patrol's Springfield and Willow Springs offices, as well as the sheriff's departments of Christian County and Douglas County. They just did not have enough evidence, even with all their resources together. The laborers made a public appeal for people to take action and pleaded with any witnesses to come forward. On July 13, 1989, a $10,000 reward was made available. When Kelly went missing, they had first offered it, but now they were asking people to come forward with knowledge about what had happened to her tragically. 4 months into the investigation, on October 20th, the Douglas County Sheriff acknowledged that not much had changed. The department eliminated circumstances, evidence, and suspects as it carried out its inquiry. On the case, they possessed nothing. When the workmen's made a tiny progress, they felt hope. On December 30th, 1989, Joan Workman, Kelly's mother, was sporadically reviewing the day's events with her family. She received a crucial piece of information from a different family, a friend of theirs, that they neglected to disclose or overlooked. 4 days after Kelly was kidnapped, a friend of Kelly's contacted to report that they had seen a man at the workman's house the afternoon Kelly vanished. Unfortunately, neither the witness nor the intruder was identified, but at least it indicated that someone had witnessed something. This was a really interesting turn of events. Due to threats and coercion, this person never reported anything to the police. This was probably someone Joan knew well, because she firmly believed Kelly would have fought back if the offender had been a stranger. However, the months soon became a year. Another statement was published by the sheriff's office. They were sure that Kelly's case would be resolved since there was someone out there who had vital information. Leonard Dwight Banks and Bobby Lee Banks, the notorious Banks brothers of the area, were the prime suspects. Bobby Lee Banks was given a polygraph test in August 1990 at the Missouri State Highway Patrol's request. It should come as no surprise that he failed the exam, which his lawyer said was caused by a lack of feeling. Their lawyer advised them not to make any public statements at the time because of the intense media attention. The police also requested that his brother, Dwight Banks, submit to a polygraph examination. The brothers lived in Seymour and had been seen about town. Dwight consented to take the polygraph exam, during which the researcher asked him 3 key questions. First of all, did he murder Kelly Ann Workman? Does he then know who killed her? Finally, did he appear to be under the effect of illicit substances? Unlike his brother, Dwight said no to every inquiry, and the examiner concluded that he was telling the truth. Additionally, the police learned that on the day Kelly vanished, a young guy was spotted in the cemetery. Later in the day, the burned-out truck belonged to this man. This man was probably involved, and his cronies burned the truck and threatened him. For a while, everything was silent. 2 years later, in October 1992, Joan received a call from an elderly person who identified herself as a lady. This person thought Kellyanne's death was related to the woman and her boyfriend, a licensed narcotic dealer. The caller's name was never discovered, and the woman and her boyfriend had alibis. Thus, this seeming lead was meaningless. However, in the interim, White's former partner revealed that he had requested her to provide an alibi on the night Kellyanne died. Authorities were still in the dark 6 years after Kellyanne Workman's decomposing body was found. According to Christian County Sheriff Steve Whitney, there were no findings from a grand jury probe. Stanley Workman, Kelly's father, thought more than one person was involved in her kidnapping and murder, but he had no evidence. When a fresh lead surfaced in the middle of July 1995, the investigation was reopened. Sheriff Whitney hinted that he had suspects, but he would not elaborate. Whitney underlined the difficulty of assembling a strong case, despite his confidence in knowing the identity of the attacker. Another interesting lead emerged as the investigation went on. Additionally, Bobby and Dwight Banks were named as suspects in Kelly's murder by July 1996. Kelly was working at the Dogwood store a few hours before she was abducted, as Dwight Banks had admitted to seeing her with his brother Bobby. However, he claimed that neither his brother nor he was involved in their tragedy or kidnapping. Actually, he and Bob were having fried chicken at his house when she had vanished. Investigators had good grounds to suspect that Dwight had used illegal drugs, like Valium or relaxants, to help him pass the polygraph exam that his brother had failed. While Kelly's case was going through all of this, on July 16, 1996, a bomb was discovered at the workman's house. The explosive was defused by police, the Jefferson City Bomb Squad, and officers from both counties. On Joan's car's hood was where the explosive was discovered. It was found at 5:30 a.m. with a menacing writing on it. When the squad set the bomb's timer off at midday, they discovered no explosive materials. It was just supposed to frighten the family. Rita Sanders, a 17-year law enforcement veteran, thought she knew who killed Kelly Ann Workman. They assisted in disposing of the body. 2 were from Seymour, and the 3rd was from a rural area near Fordland. She mentioned that just before Kelly vanished, 2 suspects were spotted close to the crime scene. Rita thought they had the case solved, but time and manipulated evidence made her dubious they would ever face justice. Remarkably, Rita was let go from the force in that same year. Rita informed the laborers that as Kelly valiantly fought for her life, a witness observed her being violently placed into a pickup. When a man from Ava came forward and admitted to the crime in December 1998, things really got going. He also named 2 other males as suspects, but no one was taken into custody. Wiley Belt was an accomplice and witness. DNA testing warrants were served to Dwight Banks in Seymour and Wiley Belt in Fordland on June 9, 1999, in relation to Kellyanne Workman's death. However, neither guy was charged or detained, and the test results were never made public. In an interview, Wiley Belt said he didn't know the Banks brothers and that he wasn't terrified of the testing. He claimed that since he saw Kelly at the dogwood store that day, someone must have noticed him there. Thus, the case was forgotten for many years. No fresh leads were available. A few of the cops who were involved retired, and the photographic proof was destroyed. While grocery shopping, Kelly's sister Pam once ran into Dwight Banks. He wanted to get into a fight with her because it was a bad experience. Kelly Ann Workman's case was given to investigators Christopher Holland and Leslie Albrecht in 2021. The case has long been regarded as open. The two were employed by the Senior Services Bureau of Special Investigations and the Department of Health at the time. They were put on caseloads in southwest Missouri for dependent adult abuse and elder abuse. Albrecht and Holland did not have a meeting with the eyewitnesses until the second year of their investigation. In the end, they contributed vital information that strengthened the case against Belt and Bank brothers. Soon after this information was made public, an indictment was filed. However, Stanley Workman died on September 11, 2022, before he could witness the offenders being brought to justice. A Douglas County grand jury indicted Bobby Banks, 65, of Seymour, Leonard Dwight Banks, 64, of Gainesville, and Wiley Belt, 64, of Ava, on February 20th, 2024, for Kelly Ann Workman's 1989 murder, assault, and kidnapping. Each of the men had a $250,000 cash bail that kept them detained at the Douglas County Jail. At their arraignments, the three men entered not guilty pleas. Attorneys attempted to persuade the court to grant Dwight Banks some mercy in light of his diabetes and pancreatic cancer struggles. Since all three of the counts are first-degree offenses, the maximum sentence for each is life in prison. Moving on to the next case. Danielle Kloss. The horrific murder of renowned artist Danielle Kloss shocked the beach community of Ventura, California in 1991. The tragedy would plague the neighborhood for more than 30 years. After years of silence, developments in forensic genealogy ultimately provided light on the long-standing mystery, giving her family and the community some closure. Danielle Kloss, who was born on July 24, 1948, was a gifted and compassionate artist who was well known for her imaginative poems and lively energy. She overcame serious personal obstacles, including as addiction, and made impressive progress in her rehabilitation. After successfully turning her life around, Danielle committed herself to other people going through similar struggles. She was employed at a Ventura adult education facility where she helped those struggling with addiction by offering support and direction. Danielle was a talented poet as well. She and her sister worked together on a poem called Sheltered Heart. It powerfully portrayed a heart that had been brutally attacked and was bleeding and damaged. This imagery would tragically mirror her own death circumstances. Ventura, California had a night on July 15, 1991 that would stay with the locals for decades. At approximately 8 o'clock in the evening, Danielle, 42, was observed chatting with a man. This occurred at the intersection of Thompson Boulevard and Hemlock Street. Danielle would not be seen alive again after this. When Danielle didn't come home the following day, her husband filed a missing persons report. Her battered and partially dressed body was found early on July 16, 1991. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. On a hillside near Tioga Drive, in a flood control catch basin, approximately 1 mile from her last known location, her body's discovery shocked the neighborhood and prompted the Ventura Police Department to launch a comprehensive investigation. The scene of the crime was bleak. Danielle's head had been severely injured by blunt force trauma. Later, an autopsy would reveal that there was evidence of additional assault against her. Investigators discovered a blood-stained rock close to Danielle's body. which they suspect to be the weapon used to kill her. Investigators painstakingly gathered evidence from the scene, including papers, trash, cigarette butts, fingerprints, and anything that appeared suspicious or out of place. However, despite their diligence, the initial inquiry ran into problems. Witnesses claimed to have seen a white pickup truck close to the location, but it was challenging to determine who owned the truck. Despite searching the neighborhood and speaking with several others, detectives were unable to find the perpetrator or obtain enough information to make an arrest. Their attempts proved insufficient to prevent the investigation's conclusion, and ultimately the trail became untraceable. With the technology available at the time, the physical evidence gathered, including DNA from the assault kit, was insufficient to identify a suspect. Danielle's terrible death remained unresolved for over 20 years. Her case file became more than 1,000 pages long as detectives tracked down every possibility they could find and every clue they could. With the arrest of the Golden State offender in 2018 made possible by forensic genetic genealogy, this would all change. Nationwide cold case investigations would be revolutionized by this case. New investigator Tyler Buck of the Serious Crimes Branch of the Ventura Police Department spent many hours a week working on cold cases. He was especially interested in how DNA technology might be able to assist in solving them. He went over the 1,000-page case files very carefully in an attempt to find anything that had been missed. Buck mentioned that the DNA sample for the case had been sent to CODIS. Sadly, no matches had been discovered. After that, Buck examined the evidence and got in touch with the crime scene investigation team. He learned that no DNA test had ever been performed on the weapon, the rock, or Danielle's fingernail clippings. Investigators made the decision to examine these materials in May 2021 in order to compare the DNA from the assault kit with that on the rock and fingernail cuttings. The findings by September 2021 verified that every sample matched one unidentified suspect. Recognizing the need for contemporary approaches, the group investigated forensic genetic genealogy, an expensive but useful tool. They made requests for help from several organizations. Misty Gillis, a senior forensic genealogist with Identifinders International, assisted with the DNA sample analysis. The DNA profile was created and then uploaded to numerous genealogical databases. Genealogists had created a portion of the suspect's family tree by July 2022. They found a live relative who was interested in genealogy in May 2023. This relative had already constructed a family tree and given a sample of their DNA. She only had 2 male first cousins, according to analysis, and she was a first cousin match. As a result, the suspect pool was reduced to 2 brothers, the late Larry Devin Welsh and his Virginia-residing sibling. It was difficult for the investigators to get a covert DNA sample because there was only 1 brother left. The Welsh brothers' profiles were further enhanced by a cold case assault section by October 2023. Welsh had hazel eyes and brown hair, according to analysis. This fit the profile of the suspect. Blue eyes and blonde hair characterized his living brother. Virginia State Police helped by getting a DNA sample from the brother who was still alive in order to confirm. He gave details of Welsh's life. Testing revealed that he was the suspect's full sibling and not the suspect. Thus, it was established that Larry Welsh was the owner of the DNA found at the crime site. Welsh was connected to the crime by other factors. At the time of the murders, he possessed a Ventura P.O. box and a white Ford Ranger. Around the time Danielle vanished, he was spotted with her, and he was also seen by another witness close to the scene of her body's discovery. Welsh, who was 41 years old at the time of the murder, had overdosed and died in 1999. Danielle Klaus's family felt some closure after he was identified. Marcy Fort, her sister, conveyed her appreciation for the commitment of the Ventura Police Department and all those engaged in cracking the case. She thought about the lengthy road to justice and her sister's life. My sister was much more than just a casualty of a vicious act. She was a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, and an artist. She was taken from us too soon, but she was a good person with a powerful soul. She recalled seeing her sister's corpse. She was completely unrecognizable due to her severe beating. That was not how I wanted my mother to see her. It was simply heartbreaking. Festivities. I've always hoped to find out who was responsible for this. My prayers were answered 33 years later. They performed an amazing job, and I am so happy that I get to witness some justice at all. The Ventura Police Department's ingenuity and tenacity are demonstrated by the way Danielle's case was resolved. Chief Darren Schindler of the Ventura Police Department stated, "It gives me great pleasure to recognize the tenacity of detectives in their pursuit of justice for the victim and her family, from the first investigation in 1991 to the most recent developments in forensic techniques. Hope and a blueprint for resolving other unsolved cases are offered by the happy resolution of Danielle Kloss' case." Moving on to the next case. Joanne Howell. In the 1970s, Joanne Howell, an accomplished vocalist, enjoyed considerable popularity in her native Australia. Joanne, who was 51 years old, was employed as a secretary for a security firm by 2007. She left with an ex-boyfriend she had broken up with, staying in an apartment in Eustyle, Melbourne. Joanne's body was discovered inside her apartment on April 21st. They'd beaten and strangled her. She passed away at the spot despite the paramedics' best attempts to save her. Relatives spoke out, claiming that they overheard Joanne and her ex-boyfriend fighting a lot that day. Paul Charlton was his name, and he was 52 years old at the time. Joanne gave him 4 weeks' notice to move out the day she was taken from us. During an interview with detectives, he stated that he went outside the apartment to walk the dog. Upon his return, he discovered Joanne's fate and promptly contacted the authorities. Investigators needed additional evidence, but it was clear to them that Paul was the reason behind Joanne's death. One of the witnesses came forward and said, "I saw a man acting strangely around Joanne's apartment around the time she was killed." According to a medical examiner, Joanne died at about 9 o'clock at night. After 11 p.m., Charlton made a police call. This implied that he would have needed to spend more than 2 hours walking the dog, which is improbable but not completely impossible. The case was abandoned after a protracted inquiry yielded no meaningful leads. Authorities requested additional information from Republic in December 2020, claiming they were getting close to wrapping up the case. Paul Charlton was then detained after being apprehended at his residence in January 2021. According to Detective Inspector Tim Day, the community shouldn't ever forget about Tran, and the police haven't either. This is the time, if you know anything, to come forward. We are making a call to anybody who could have overheard a communication with someone that could provide insight into Tran's circumstances. He was freed on bond in June 2021, since it appears he doesn't represent a risk to the public. When the media attempted to interview Charlton, he became defensive and swung his walking stick around, not endangering anyone in the community. Investigators have not provided a detailed explanation for his arrest despite the passage of time. Nevertheless, they have stated that in 2020, they installed listening devices in Charlton's home, and statements he made contributed to his detention. Charlton is currently awaiting trial, and the investigators think I have sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. Moving on to the next case. Karen Snyder. Karen Snyder, an 18-year-old, was well known for her kind and loving demeanor. Everyone who knew Karen was touched by her warmth and friendliness. She was a loving mother and a well-liked member of her community. On November 12, 1966, her life, however, took a terrible and unexpected turn that evening. Her husband discovered her dead at her Calumet City, Illinois, home. The scene was just horrifying. Karen had sustained over 120 knife wounds to her head, arms, legs, shoulders, and chest. The several shattered ribs and bruises on her face and hands further demonstrated the savagery of the attack. Even with the intensity of the attack, Paula, her 2.5-month-old infant, was safe in her cot, a quiet observer of the horrific crime. James Barbier, one of the pallbearers, was a friend of Karen's husband as well. Those in attendance were taken aback by his obvious injuries. James was taken into custody for her death following the burial. He was never properly charged, though, even after the arrest. About whatever possible reason he might have had for doing such a horrific deed, the authorities stayed silent. Their silence simply served to heighten the mystery surrounding Karen's terrible death, leaving friends and family in search of clarification and redress. Authorities were forced to free him because they could find no solid evidence linking him to the heinous crime, which left the Snyder family and the neighborhood without closure. An unexpected resurgence of the long-dormant investigation into Karen Snyder's slaying occurred in December of 2022. Detectives in Calumet City reopened the case in response to a call regarding the decades-old crime from a man named Kevin Seeley. He said that Dee, his grandmother, talked about the case a lot. She implied that the family still harbored unanswered questions and unfounded suspicions. It didn't take long to identify this caller as a member of Karen's family. His tenacity served as the impetus for a revisitation of the terrifying events of 1966. Kevin stated, "One day I was reading up on it at work and I was like, okay. Perhaps in 57 years technology will allow for the identification of the criminal." Motivated by this fresh tip, 2 Calumet City detectives went inside the department's evidence locker. They were shocked to learn that every piece of evidence from the initial probe had been painstakingly maintained. There was a lot of important information in the locker. It contained numerous physical objects found at the crime scene as well as large volumes of blood evidence. Detailed case files outlining the inquiry are also included. The detective was determined to use contemporary forensic techniques, so he sent the blood-stained clothes to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab for examination. Since the 1960s, DNA technology has advanced significantly, opening up new possibilities for identifying the offender. The detectives then set out for Creve Coeur, Missouri, equipped with a search warrant and met with growing expectation. James Barbier, a 79-year-old former co-worker of Karen Snyder's husband and the original suspect from all those years ago, was their target. Barbier has continued to be a fascinating figure over time. He provided the detectives with a DNA sample which opened the door to a possible breakthrough in the unsolved case. The evidence that was tested produced definitive findings. Every item tested positive for the DNA of James Barbier. His DNA was collected by detectives in March 2023 using a buccal swab, and the match was unmistakable. Barbier was a prime suspect from the start, but Karen Snyder's family experienced decades of confusion and suffering before they ultimately made a breakthrough. That fateful night, Barbier went back to his Gary, Indiana, home where his wife was watching their small child. He was acting very differently than normal. He seemed anxious and tense. The blood smeared on his skin, the stains on his clothes, and the cuts on his body were all visible to his wife. Barbier raced inside without saying anything, taking off his bloodied clothes and tossing them in the washing machine. His wife was confused and uncomfortable by the sight, feeling that something was very wrong. The Snyder family is facing a difficult decision after many years. Their hopes for justice were reignited by the recent arrest of Barbier and the reopening of the case. James Barbier has an arrest warrant issued for him in April 2024. Law enforcement officials showed up at Barbier's Missouri residence on April 29, 2024. The 79-year-old spouse of Karen's co-worker was taken into custody. An investigation that has plagued Calumet City for almost 60 years saw a dramatic turning point with the arrest. After being arrested, Barbier was extradited to Illinois in 3 days. Initially, it is not apparent if Barbier had obtained legal counsel. The arrest has left people who remember Karen, her terrible death, and the unsolved mystery surrounding it, feeling both relieved and grieving all over again. Barbier appeared in court again on May 2nd, this time confronting the seriousness of the recently discovered DNA evidence that connected him to one of the clothes Karen was wearing when she passed her. There was a noticeable tension in the courtroom as the community awaited Karen's justice, and the specifics of the case, which dates back decades, were reviewed. Barbier's age and health were factors that the court had to take into account when deciding his pretrial status under the Pretrial Fairness Act. As a result, the judge chose to free Barbier, but with stringent guidelines meant to keep him within the legal system. Even though Barbier's release was conditional, opinions differed. His being able to stay at home free until the trial disappoints the family. Bill Neves, Karen's brother, remarked, "It's hard to believe he was free for 57 years while he was sitting there. And since my sister has been in the ground, we need to, hopefully, create a strong case and ensure that he is held accountable for his actions." Barbier would not, however, be kept in jail until trial due to the legal system's duty to strike a balance between the pursuit of justice and humanitarian concerns. Regular check-ins with law enforcement, giving up his passport to thwart any escape attempt, and a requirement to continue living under house arrest with electronic monitoring were all part of his release terms. These steps seek to meet Barbier's age and health-related problems while maintaining his accountability and court accessibility. Barbier's next status hearing is scheduled on May 21, 2024, in Markham Court. Karen's daughter, Paula Larson, stated that perhaps he could have also killed me if he had had more time, or, in my opinion, been much more insane than he is. "This is the man," my father's side of the family had always said. From the day he discovered her until his death, my father battled to see that justice was served. Paula spoke of her mother's beauty and her family's deep love for her. When the matter was reopened, she got a call. It was among the best phone calls I have ever gotten. The call they made the other day to inform me that the individual had been taken into custody and arrested was the second best call I have ever heard. The other day, I had to drive by the graveyard. In the drive by myself, I shouted aloud, "Mom and Dad, we got them." Moving on to the next case. Mary Mars Cowan. On July 4, 1965, Mary Mars Cowan, a 39-year-old homemaker, went out drinking and dancing with her spouse, Dr. Madison Cowan III, a professor of hematology at the Kentucky Medical Center. Sam and Betty Strother, who were pals, were also with them. In true American fashion, the group celebrated Independence Day by heading to the members-only Idle Hour Country Club. In 1965, their drink expenditure of over $40 amounted to much than $300 in alcohol alone. Sam Strother would subsequently estimate that the four people in the gathering drank 10 beers apiece. Following their night of dancing and mingling at the club, the elites went back to the Strother residence, which was 3 streets away from the K-Win residence. Mary complained of being sick, so Sam Strother, the husband of one of her friends, drove her home. The couple's 2 kids and the Strother's kid were staying at the K-Win residence. After arriving home, a taxi was summoned to return the babysitter to her apartment at 12:30. But because of a misplacement, it took over an hour for the taxi to show up. While he had a beer and stayed downstairs with the babysitter, he indicated that he left at roughly 1:30 a.m., leaving the door unlocked until after the babysitter was picked up. He said Mary never returned downstairs. Back at the still divorcing Strother residence, Dr. Madison Kahn and Sam kept drinking and mingling until around 3 in the morning, when Dr. Cowan declared himself too drunk to go home by himself, and made the decision to stay the night, which was not unusual for him to do. Betty picked up her child and the K-Win children the following morning and drove them back to her own house to prepare them breakfast after hearing from her own child that they hadn't had any food yet. She later took them to a neighboring swimming class. Betty returned to the K-Win residence after leaving the kids off and calling and phoning Mary again without success. She discovered Mary was still in her bedroom, sitting rigidly in a dark chair with her head cocked to one side. The room was unoccupied, and her bed remained made. Betty figured she had dozed off. When Betty looked more closely, she saw that Mary had passed away, not just from a bad hangover, but from a serious illness. Alone and terrified, Betty contacted both Sam Strother, Mary's husband, and Dr. Kwan, Mary's husband, and they both came right away. Sam Kwan was given the task of throwing away Mary's drink, which was on the bedside table, as soon as Dr. Kwan declared that Mary had killed herself. Upon confirming her death, they phoned one of Dr. Kewen's medical pals rather than the police or an ambulance. It took until the crime scene was sufficiently tainted before police were summoned. The coroner needed 6 weeks to declare her death to be a homicide. It wasn't until the later autopsy that it was discovered she had been stabbed twice with a needle of some kind, carrying an unidentified solution that the 2 needle marks on her thigh became visible. The cause of death was determined by autopsy to be carbolic acid poisoning. The CDC states that carbolic acid can result in the following symptoms: nausea, heavy perspiration, headache, dizziness, ringing in the ears, seizures, coma, respiratory depression, and death. Mary had blood alcohol content just below the fatal threshold of 0.4%. Her alcohol use may have made her already extremely vulnerable to attack, making it possible for her killer to give her the 2 injections of what the police thought to be a sedative. The extravagant means of taking a life, the drink spiking or other oral ingestion technique, the 2 puncture wounds, and the blood alcohol content all looked like they were taken straight out of a Hollywood film. And as everyone who has watched a movie knows, the husband is usually the main suspect. The pair was not at all pleased in their marriage despite the urge of Mary's father, the well-known George Swineboard, the dean of Kentucky's thoroughbred auctioneers, and the man who sold many of the future winners of the Kentucky Derby. The purportedly grieving spouse, Dr. Madison Kewen, was anything but a faithful man. Mary had received a divorce request from Dr. Kewen, but the divorce process had not yet started. Aside from his own wife, he was seeing 2 other ladies. He first had an affair with a colleague hospital hematologist, Dr. Emma J. Lepet, a divorcee. This would start a lengthy romance that had been going on for more than 2 years when Mary passed away. Subsequently, Dr. Kewen started dating Barbara Liebman, who was a colleague's wife in addition to being one of his patients. Suffering from Hodgkin's cancer, Barbara Liebman appeared to be Dr. Madison's go-to woman following the breakup with Dr. Lepet. Regarding Barbara Liebman, the philandering physician subsequently admitted to law enforcement that, quote, he was in love with her. But Barbara Liebman's husband was not in such a playful mood, and he threatened to hurt the man who was seeing his wife physically. Mary Kewen knew about the affair and was concerned about how it might affect her husband's reputation as well as his distinguished family. Given that his second affair included a patient, his medical license was in jeopardy. To further complicate things, Barbara, the patient who later became a lover, was expecting a child and wanted an abortion from Dr. Madison. She told the police that she was concerned the abortion wouldn't take place after Mary died, though it's unclear if she thought her boyfriend or husband was the father. Naturally, Barbara's husband, Dr. Liebman, would be the second physician to be charged with murder if word of this affair spread. However, there existed a third possibility, which, upon closer examination, would seem to be the most malevolent of all. Dr. Lepet, the other lady, was reported to be extremely domineering. She would drive by Dr. Madison Kewen's house and phone his office a lot in an attempt to stay in touch. She even had the ability to inform his secretary that she was under no obligation to forward any calls from Mrs. Liebman to Dr. Kewen. Liebman was unhappy enough with Dr. Lepet's fixation on him that he was altering his exit strategy from the office and hanging his coat in different locations so that Dr. Lepet could keep an eye on him. Dr. Lepet often called Dr. Liebman, Barbara's husband, incoherently informing him of his wife's extramarital affair, albeit she did not disclose the identity of the other party. These calls were strange and invasive, inquiring about Barbara's background at random. Yet the most peculiar call came in between 2 and 3 in the morning on July 5th. Reportedly from Dr. Liebman's wife, this call, which was answered by a phone receptionist, stated that he was needed at home. By this point, Dr. Liebman was aware of the calls and had a suspicion that the woman who had been questioning him so much about Barbara was the one who was calling, not his wife. and that the call was placed to make him go home and discover his wife cheating. At this point, Dr. Lightman was aware that Dr. Kewen was the one conducting an extramarital affair. Dr. Lightman, infuriated by the continuous calls at all hours, called the police. However, since he was unable to identify the caller and no crime had occurred, the police were unable to address the issue as it was merely a phone call. However, months after the first murder, Barbara Lightman received test results from the hospital related to her Hodgkin's cancer. The results were given to Dr. Lepet, a fellow hematologist, while Dr. Kewen was not on duty. Dr. Lepet concluded that giving Barbara Lightman nitrogen mustard would be the best course of action. A chemical included by Schedule I of the Chemical Weapons Convention is nitrogen mustard. Lightman said that Dr. Lepet wasn't her doctor and that she wouldn't accept treatment until Dr. Kewen returned to duty. Nitrogen mustard is a potent medicine. After Mary's sudden death, Dr. Kwan continued to meet Barbara and displayed odd behavior. 5 days after Mary's daughter passed away, he informed her that the pathologist believed her daughter had simply consumed too many Alka-Seltzers, causing gas to build up in the system and seemingly causing a heart attack, which, given that the pathology and mortuary departments had not yet determined the cause of death, was a strange remark to make. With no additional leads or witnesses, the police were left to speculate as to who might be trying to tie up loose ends: the philandering husband, Dr. Kewen, the jealous ex-affair, Dr. Lepet, or the resentful husband, Dr. Lightman. When a writer interviewed Dr. Lepet years later, she said that she had never even met Dr. Kewen. There has never been a murderer apprehended, and Mary's case is classified as a permafrost cold case. Moving on to the next case. Lubitka Tobic. In 1971, 6-year-old Lubitka Tobic, her parents, and her 8-year-old brother Michael resided in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Lubitka and Michael were performing outside their Dulaud Road residence on May 14, 1971, in the evening. Just before 9 at night, a man came up to them. Lubitka accepted his $8 offer to go for a stroll down the street with him. In an attempt to divert Michael's attention while he was walking away hand in hand with Lubitka, the man also offered him money to go ride his bike. When the man and Lubitsch failed to return, Michael informed his mother and the police were called. 4 hours later, in the backyard of a house on Hickory Avenue, Lubitsch's body was discovered less than a mile from her residence. About 1 in the morning, her body was discovered by a cop using a flashlight to search the yards. Her body was deposited at a gate that led to the rear alley by the culprit. Next to Lubitsch's body, police discovered 2 of her teeth and an adult tooth. She had suffered a serious and brutal beating. Investigators gathered the adult tooth and other pieces of evidence so they may use it in the future. Reports from witnesses claimed to have seen an odd man loitering at a cafe across the street from the Topic residence. He was never found. The case received widespread media coverage. Hundreds of tips were submitted from both the U.S. and Canada. More than 500 people were at one point thought to be relevant to the investigation. Investigators were able to obtain DNA in the 1990s from objects discovered at the scene of the crime. Investigators said in 2015 that they had developed a DNA profile of the offender. Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology company, was enlisted by investigators to assist with DNA phenotyping, the process of estimating physical characteristics and ancestry from unidentified DNA evidence. In order to reduce the number of suspects on their lists and provide leads for criminal investigations, law enforcement organizations utilize the Firm Snapshot DNA phenotyping service. Parabon produced 2 distinct photos. The first one displayed the suspect's appearance at the time of the crime, which was at the age of 25. The other photo displayed the suspect's potential current appearance at roughly 70 years of age. Staff Sergeant Scott Chapman of Windsor Police declared in December 2019 that Lubitka Tovic's case has been resolved. Lubitsch's case, according to Chapman, is one of many unsolved instances that was resolved by genetic genealogy. According to Chapman, our case was among the first in Canada to employ this method of offender identification. Users have the choice to withhold their genetic information from law enforcement on ancestry research websites like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, according to Chapman. In the end, the DNA of a distant cousin discovered in a database helped police identify the culprit. The only information they provided was that he had recently died and had moved out to the west following his criminal activity. Although the police were praised for having finally solved the case, several members of the public took issue with their decision to withhold the man's identity. At last, Winter Police reversed course in 2023. It was declared that the culprit was Frank Arthur Hall. In 1971, he was 22 years old. The Topish family lived fewer than 2 miles away from Hall. Prior to the confirmation of his guilt by the DNA match, he was neither a person of interest nor a suspect. Shortly before the DNA match in February 2019, Hall passed away in Edmonton, Canada. It was Staff Sergeant Scott Chapman of Windsor Police who made the announcement that Hall was the culprit. He clarified that because there was so little precedence, it was uncertain in 2019 when he declared the matter solved whether they could lawfully name Hall. Hall's identity was suppressed at the time in part because of that, according to Chapman, who acknowledged that since then, things have evolved as genetic genealogy has gained popularity. Chapman took a plane to Edmonton before that information was made public in order to inform Hall's family. He claimed they were shocked, but yet shown strength. Chapman stated, "We have to remember that whatever Frank Hall did in his life is not a reflection on these people. They, too, have suffered because of this information." Chapman claims that it is unclear from police records if Hall's house was searched during the initial inquiry in 1971. Nonetheless, Windsor and other police departments were aware of Hall, primarily for theft and other property offenses. Since 2019, various law enforcement authorities have been informed about Hall, even though the public was unaware of his identity. With Hall's name now public, Chapman thinks there may be an increase in public tips about additional crimes. According to him, it can breathe fresh life into many investigations. It's totally feasible. Moving on to the next case. Mary Jane Van Gilder. Mary Jane Van Gilder made a choice during World War II that would result in a long-lasting mystery. She moved to an Ohio Air Force depot in search of fresh prospects, leaving behind her life in West Virginia, her husband, and her 5 children. Mary Jane's life, however, took an unexpected turn in March 1945 when she abruptly quit from her job and vanished. It would take nearly 8 decades for her story to come to light. Mary Jane Croft was born in Montana on November 19, 1911, the fourth of John and Anna Croft's 8 children. On January 29, 1929, at the age of 17, she wed James Wesley Van Gilder. After their twins were stillborn in 1935, Mary Jane gave birth to their 5th child by the time World War II broke out. But something happened in Mary Jane and James's marriage 2 years after the birth of their youngest child, Cheryl Judy Gay Van Gilder. After that, Mary Jane left the Van Gilder family farm. She rented an apartment in downtown Fairmont, above the former Fairmont Theater, after divorcing James and her kids. In Fairmont, West Virginia, she subsequently began working. Mary Jane Van Gilder left her husband James and their 5 children behind when she traveled from Fairmont to Huron County, Ohio, in 1944. At the Wilkins Air Force Depot in Shelby, Ohio, 7 miles from Plymouth, she accepted a civilian position. Mary Jane would buy war bonds from various Shelby area People's Bank branches throughout this time of her family's estrangement. After that, she would mail them to Anna Mae, her eldest child. Anna Mae told me that after sending me war bonds, she wrote to ask that I return them by mail. She then proceeded to cash the bonds at several Ohio banks. Anna Mae added that occasionally her mother would also send clothes for her. She started to become curious and demand answers regarding her parents' divorce despite these enigmatic messages from her mother. Mary Jane asked for all of the bonds to be returned to her in January 1945. That marked the end of her relationship with her family. According to court documents, on February 12, 1945, she filed for divorce in Ohio. Less than a month later, on March 8, 1945, she announced her resignation from her position, citing an increase in domestic responsibilities as her reason. When Mary Jane did not appear in court, her counsel withdrew her divorce case in April 1946. However, James Van Gilder had already received his divorce decree from a West Virginia court by that point. James remarried in 1946 and carried on raising the children he and Mary Jane had together. In 1985, James departed from this life. Mary Jane's loved ones searched for her on multiple occasions throughout the years, but she was never formally reported missing at the time of her disappearance. Not until Lester Croft, Mary Jane's brother, came home from World War II did Anna Mae start looking for her mother in earnest. Lester visited the Marion County Sheriff and corresponded with the Plymouth, Ohio police chief. They would correspond through the 1960s as the decades passed, but they wouldn't discover a connection to their mother's history until 2004. Following an article published in a Plymouth newspaper on December 2, 4, one of her grandkids got a letter from William King the following month. He claimed to have worked with Mary Jane at the Ohio Depot, but had lost contact with her during layoffs at the company. The search for the family would stall from 2004 till 2018. Mary Jane's granddaughter, Mindy Wilson, sent a Facebook comment to the Shelby Police Department in October 2018. Detective Adam Turner was given the case by Police Chief Lance Combs. He combed through Ohio's and the nation's unidentified descendant cases for years, looking for any that fit Mary Jane's description. He discovered a newspaper item about a Jane Doe that was discovered in Preble County, Ohio in the 1960s while conducting his investigation. The description of the deceased woman's remains seemed to fit Mary Jane. Late in 2019, the bones were dug up and transported to a state crime lab. Turner stated, "They informed me that the body was not Mary Jane Van Gilder, based on some DNA testing they were able to perform. This is how the tale may have ended. I might have simply said, 'I'm done,'" Turner remarked. "This no longer belongs to me. Preble County is this." Nevertheless, he made the decision to move forward, working with Moxie Forensic Investigations to create a DNA profile and using investigative genetic genealogy to solve the case. After 3 years, with a few setbacks owing to the epidemic, they discovered that Preble County Jane Doe was not a woman after all. The closest related to the human remains, Tina Barrett of Cincinnati, a great-niece, is matched by DNA. Tina had entered her DNA profile into the public genealogy database GED Match, where users may choose to grant law enforcement access to their personal data. Albert Frost, a Hamilton, Ohio resident who vanished sometime in the early 1960s, is the owner of the human remains. So, when Albert's body was discovered in May 1968, why did the coroner think he was a woman? His bones, which were dispersed across roughly 75 feet, were severely decayed. Turner believes that the fact that Albert was short and extremely thin could have contributed to the error. The cause of death could not be ascertained by the coroner. Turner revealed that there was a rumor among his nieces and nephews, who are among his surviving family members, that Albert was fatally battered outside of an Eaton, Ohio pub. Turner solved another enigma when he contacted Tina. Tina remarked, "Up until that point, I was unaware that Albert even existed. Therefore, I assumed they were referring to my great-aunt Clara. Nobody discussed it. It turns out that the same family has 2 lost siblings. Clara, Albert's sister, vanished also and was never found again. She went by the pseudonym Inez and disappeared 10 years before Albert did in the 1950s. She was in her early 20s. When the young mother vanished, she was residing in Cleveland, Ohio. Turner was informed by several family members that Clara's mother had sold her to a man who would go on to marry her. When she disappeared, they had 2 children together, an infant and a toddler. Clara's family reported to the police that she had suffered physical abuse from her husband because they found her disappearance odd. Clara's husband reported to the police at the time that she had just fled. According to Tina, she wasn't the kind of person to simply get up and walk away. By 1952, Turner learned that her husband had remarried and relocated the family to Pennsylvania. Clara's late husband is being investigated in this case. He passed away many years ago, according to information from her family. Mary Jane's disappearance investigation remained an unresolved cold case. When Turner was able to obtain Mary Jane's military personnel file and post it online, it gave him a breakthrough in the cold case. Turner refers to her as a civilian sleuth who had been following the case. November 2023, the woman learned about Percy L. Sebring's name. Upon further investigation, they discovered that this individual, like Mary Jane, had also worked at the Wilkins Air Force Depot in Ohio. A few days after filing for divorce in February 1945, she was promoted to high-lift fork operator, according to employee records. She replaced Percy in the role and most likely learned from him. Turner discussed this breakthrough as follows. There were dozens of names in Mary Jane's military file, but this one in particular would turn out to be important. 1969 saw Percy's passing in Kansas City, Missouri. A train rolled over him. However, Turner was able to track down his documents and discovered he had wed Mary Jane Sebring. She was born on the same day as Mary Jane Van Gilder and died in 1990. The couple was residents of Arkansas and had 2 children, one of whom was born in December 1945 and was named Percy Jr. 9 months have passed since Mary Jane quit her position at Wilkins Air Force Depot. Turner contacted Bobby Sebring, one of Percy Jr.'s children, on Facebook and informed him that she was unaware of her grandmother's existence and that it had not been discussed. According to Turner, Bobby and her siblings provided him pictures of their grandmother, demonstrating beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mary Jane Sebring was, in fact, Mary Jane Van Gilder. He contrasted their signatures as well. The structure and design of every letter were strikingly similar. It became official in 2024 after a DNA test. Without a doubt, Mary Jane Sebring was Mary Jane Van Gilder. Mary Jane Sebring was using a different social security number than the one that was listed in her military personnel file, which she had somehow obtained. Following her death from colon cancer on May 31, 1990, Mary Jane was interred next to her husband, Percy, in his native Louisiana. The Sebrings, Mary Jane's grandchildren, thought she was amazing and the epitome of a grandma. She enjoyed gardening, and hydrangeas were her favorite flower. She was an excellent chef and enjoyed sun tea. Turner claimed that during Mary Jane's terminal illness, she confided in one of her granddaughters about something she was unable to disclose to her and would never know. According to him, her granddaughter had previously thought that her grandma was speaking incoherently, but everything now makes sense. Turner said that after spending decades looking for Mary Jane, the Van Gilder children and grandkids had experienced great anguish in learning the truth about her fate. Though she never had the opportunity to meet her grandmother, Mindy Wilson expressed gratitude for having been able to inform Mary Jane's surviving children about her passing. Our family has at last found closure, Mindy added, but it has been a hard road. Our grandmother's disappearance began many years ago, before I was even born. Turner claimed that because their grandma lied to them about her past and never revealed who she truly was, the Sebring grandchildren have also been going through the range of emotions. He continued by saying that the reason Mary Jane chose to leave her family in West Virginia and begin a new life somewhere is still a mystery, and most likely will never be discovered. A family that mourned her for 79 years and loved and looked after her. It demonstrates how actions we make can have an impact on generations of members of our immediate family as well as our descendants, even beyond time and space. We should always think about the people we love when making decisions in life. Mary Jane, it turns out, had a family and a second secret existence. Both families were unaware of one another. The disappearance of Mary Jane Van Gilder was a story of reinvention rather than malicious play. She made the decision to start again and move on from her background, which was unknown until Detective Turner's tenacious research ended a family's long-term search. Moving on to the next case. Crystal Rogers, with her partner Brooks Hawk, their 2-year-old son Eli, and her 4 children from her last marriage, 35-year-old Crystal Rogers resided in Bardstown, Kentucky in 2015. Just around 14,000 people live in Bardstown, a little town known as the bourbon capital of the world. Tommy and Sherry Ballard had one daughter, Crystal, who was the oldest. They were, by all accounts, extremely close. To ensure that her 5 children were always well taken care of, she worked 2 jobs. Brooks, Eli, and Crystal spent the weekend of July 4th at his family's farm. Situated around 9 miles south of Bardstown's downtown, the farm spans 245 acres. Crystal left 2 of her kids with a babysitter and dropped off the other 2 at her ex-husband's residence. When Brooks awoke on July 4th, 2015, Eli was beside him, but Crystal was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared entirely. It wasn't her car in the driveway. Surprisingly, Brooks chose not to file a missing persons report. He kept celebrating the 4th of July at the farm with his family. He claimed that because she frequently went out with friends and stayed out late, sometimes not returning home until the next morning, he was not initially concerned about her absence. But Crystal's family was worried right away. When they called her several times that day and she didn't pick up, they started to get worried. 2 days later, on July 5th, Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, reported daughter missing. She later told the newspaper, "I told Brooks that I was going to report her missing to the police department, and he said that's what you should do." Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Tommy Ballard, Crystal's father, discovered her maroon 2007 Chevrolet Impala on July 5th. It was parked near the Bluegrass Parkway's mile marker 14, flat tire in tow. Her mobile phone and pocketbook were discovered inside, and the keys were still in the ignition. The driver's seat was not where it normally was. The fact that Crystal had not been the last person to drive the car was quickly discovered by her relatives. Sadly, the finding of Crystal's car provided no information concerning her location. After that, her family declared a $25,000 reward for information that helped solve her disappearance. With teary eyes, Sherry Ballard added, "We love her. We're looking for her. We just want her to come home." Families and strangers from all over the world set out to search every square inch of Nelson County and the surrounding area, demonstrating the community's tremendous response. Sammy Johnson, a family member, stated, "We have searched the rivers. We have looked everywhere for her, including homes, farms, wells, and sinkholes." The Ballard family was outspoken in their belief that Brooks Hook was somehow connected to Crystal's disappearance. Crystal's sister stated in an interview that Brooks Hook has never once offered to look for the family or provide assistance. In an interview, he acknowledged that there were moments when their relationship was tense, but he categorically denied being involved in Crystal's abduction. He declared, "I am innocent in every way in this." He insisted he was assisting with search operations behind the scenes, despite the criticism from Crystal's family. On July 8th, 3 days after Crystal's automobile was discovered, Brooks was taken in for interrogation by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. According to Brooks, Crystal went on a date night the night before she vanished. He said that after they arrived home and she was playing games on her phone, they fed the cows and went for a walk around midnight. The chronology and additional particulars of Brooks' narrative did not make up. They were out walking in a field at that time, especially with their 2-year-old son. So it did not make much sense given how much rain there was that evening. John Snow, a detective from Nelson County, conducted the interrogation and pointed out the contradictions in Brooks's account. but he persisted in saying he was unrelated to Crystal's abduction. Detective John Snow questioned Brooks about a late-night phone call with a specific number on the night that Crystal had disappeared during the interview that was recorded. When Brooks, Crystal, and the kids got on the phone, they were driving home in their pickup. Who was calling Brooks? The detective questioned. Reluctantly, Brooks revealed to him that Steve Lawson was the owner of the number. When Detective Snow inquired as to Steve Lawson's identity, Brooks said that it was someone he employed. Brooks admitted to the investigator that he had no idea why Steve had contacted him at such a late hour. Then, Brooks was told by Detective Snow to contact Steve from the questioning room. Steve clarified by saying that he had spoken with Brooks regarding a rental property. According to him, Brooks instructed him to contact Katie, who was in charge of the properties, and she promised to get back to him. Brooks corrected him, pointing out that it was actually Crystal. Detective Snow questioned Brooks about his decision to tell Steve Lawson that she would call him back after the call, given that Brooks had been by his side in his truck at the time. With an explanation, Brooks said he didn't want to disturb Crystal with work-related matters at that late hour. When Brooks' brother, Nick Hawk, a Bardstown police officer, found out that his brother was being examined by detectives, he called Brooks on his cell phone and advised him not to talk to the authorities. When Nick was asked to testify before a grand jury the following day by city officials, investigators began to assume that he was also involved in Crystal's abduction. Nick ceased collaborating with the sheriff's office at this point. He did, however, consent to a polygraph examination following a Kentucky State Police interview. The FBI contacted Nick, and on July 20th, he eventually underwent a polygraph exam. Concerns regarding the polygraph test findings were raised by the examiner with McCubbin, the chief of police in Bardstown. Nick claimed he didn't care what your computer said when presented with the data, refuting any suggestion that he had been dishonest. I object to being called a liar, which is what you are doing to me. Tommy and Sherry Ballard, Crystal's parents, began the process of attempting to obtain custody of Eli, the 2-year-old child she had with Brooks Hawk, in August of 2015. The Ballards saw Brooks Hawk for the first time since Crystal was reported missing on that particular court day. Tommy Ballard told me he looked me in the eye after the court hearing. I looked him in the eye. All I want to do is see my grandson. The only people I worry about are my daughter and my grandchild. At that point, it was decided that Eli would remain with Brooks. 3 months after Crystal vanished, the Nelson County Sheriff's Office announced in October that she was no longer living. Nick Hawk was let go from the Bardstown Police Department on October 16, 2015, for obstructing the investigation into Crystal's disappearance. He was charged with informing his brother that he would be interviewed by detectives and giving him advice not to talk to them. Later, Nick informed the Kentucky State Police that he had just called his brother to warn him that he should defend himself in case they were trying to trick him. In October 2015, the Kentucky State Police formally designated Brooks Hawk as a suspect in Crystal's disappearance. I have 8 pages of circumstances that led me to look in Brooks Hawk's direction, a police officer stated. Hawk went on to refute any involvement on his part in the disappearance, claiming, "My entire family's name is trashed for something that's not even connected to me. It requires a great deal of effort and energy. Even pulling over on the side of the road makes me appear guilty, and this is becoming ridiculous now. I don't require legal counsel. I'm not guilty. And this is getting ridiculous in my opinion." Footage from the separate police interviews with the Humph brothers was later made public by the authorities. A local newspaper said in December 2015 that Danny Singleton had been arrested on 38 charges of false swearing on allegations that he had misled under oath to a grand jury about the Crystal disappearance inquiry. Singleton has worked with Brooks Hawk for a long time and is a good friend. Singleton was detained for 6 months before entering a guilty plea and being let out of jail. When a private investigator discovered that a white Buick was parked at the Hawk farm the night Crystal vanished, it became a crucial piece of evidence. A few weeks after Crystal vanished, Anna Whitesides, the grandmother of the Hawk brothers, sold the white Buick she owned. The 82-year-old was subpoenaed by the authorities to testify before a grand jury in June 2016. According to the subpoena, the car might have been cleaned, used for body disposal, and then sold in an effort to hide evidence. Invoking her Fifth Amendment rights, Anna Whitesides declined to appear before a grand jury out of concern that she would be found guilty of a crime. There are many factors that may trap an 82-year-old woman, especially in a high-profile case with an investigation this frenzied, according to Whitesides' attorney. Attorney Jason Floyd said that the information provided by the car buyer and Anna Whitesides' statement to the police was sufficient. A judge ruled that all upcoming Whitesides proceedings must remain confidential. Despite several search operations during the course of the year that Crystal remained missing, Hawk's grandmother had never been charged or arrested in relation to Crystal's disappearance. Afterwards, a more thorough search of the Hawk family farm was conducted in August 2016. At least 14 cadaver dogs were used by the police to search 300 acres. According to Detective John Snow, the Hawk farm is thought to have been the scene of a crime involving Crystal. The homes of Nick Hoke, his brother, and his mother, Rosemary Hoke, were searched, as was the home of Hoke's grandmother, Anna Whiteside. Several pieces of agricultural equipment were taken as possible evidence. John Snow later stated that the search was conducted in an attempt to locate DNA, a body, or other possibly important evidence. I have hope. We are heading in the right way, in my opinion. We may still have a long way to go, but I believe we're getting close. When Brooks Hawk's new girlfriend, Crystal Maupin, was seen on camera damaging signs related to Crystal Rogers' case, she was taken into custody in July 2017. Supportive signs for the family had been placed all throughout Bardstown ever since Crystal vanished. A court ordered Crystal Maupin to submit an apologetic letter to Sherry Ballard after she took several of those signs. Sherry made a comment. She might have just apologized. I apologize for what I did, but it seemed more like she was attempting self-defense. Tommy Ballard, Crystal's father, looked for his daughter every day and even began his own inquiry. On November 19, 2017, 16 months after her abduction, her devoted father was getting ready to go hunting on the Ed Brent Lake family property. The eldest son of Crystal, his 12-year-old grandson, was beside him. Tommy Ballard was hit in the chest by an unidentified shooter who moved toward him. He didn't make it. Tommy Ballard was 54. According to the coroner's office for Nelson County, Crystal's father was shot once in the chest, with the bullet passing through his back and into his chest. Sherry, Crystal's mother, thought he was being targeted because he was so close to making a breakthrough for their daughter. She revealed to a journalist that her husband's search for their daughter led to his death. She claimed that her spouse was the greatest supporter of the search for Crystal and was constantly coming up with new places to look for her. Sherry Ballard claimed he felt he was being followed in the days before he was shot, and he feels he was targeted. Following the deadly shooting, the police conducted another search of Anna Whiteside's house, but turned up nothing. 2 retired troopers were employed by Commissioner Rick Sanders to look into a few high-profile, unresolved cases in Bardstown, including the one involving Crystal and her father, Tommy Ballard. While Brooks was the primary guardian, Crystal's mother continued to attempt to obtain custody of Eli, her youngest son. Nelson Circuit Judge Stephen Hayden made a strong case in his final custody decision, stating that there is substantial evidence of animosity between the Ballard family and Brooks, and that there's a substantial risk of emotional harm to the child. Only a few weeks after Crystal vanished, Sherry Ballard and her late husband submitted a petition for grandparent visitation. I've done everything conceivable that the courts have requested me to do, Sherry told a local reporter. I still don't get to see my grandson. I will not accept the fact that he is not my daughter's son. That is her son. They seem to want me to simply take him out of my daughter's life, but I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do that. Sherry was first awarded weekend visitation dates with her grandson by a judge following multiple custody hearings in trial court. In November 2018, however, a 3-judge panel overturned that ruling, concurring that it is not in the boy's best interest to spend time with his grandmother because of the ongoing conflict between Brooks and Sherry. That decision was followed by multiple hearings. In November 2018, Nelson County chose Ramon Piñeroa as the next sheriff following the resignation of Ed Mattingly. The primary investigative agency in Crystal's disappearance had been the sheriff's office. It had been said that Ramon Piñeroa was determined to solve Crystal's case. He stated in an interview that the agency had a solid notion of what had occurred to Crystal and that his goal is to gather sufficient information and proof to file an arrest. There was a growing desire for justice as the years passed. As her story was told on TV shows and true crime podcasts, Crystal's family never gave up looking for her or giving up on pursuing justice. The case of the mother of five has generated a lot of news coverage, podcasts, and films. A crime series revolves around Crystal Rogers' disappearance. Part of the first episode of the third season of the well-liked real-life nightmare features the newest docuseries. The HLN investigations team delves further into Crystal's disappearance in Bourbontown mystery. The Crystal Rogers case has also been the subject of numerous podcasts. Crystal's family has put up signs across Bardstown and the surrounding towns requesting any information regarding her disappearance. For many years, the 35-year-old's disappearance had baffled the authorities, tormented her family, and lingered in the tiny community of Bardstown. John Snow, the lead detective in Crystal's investigation, retired in July 2019. During one of his final interviews, he was questioned about the likelihood of finding Crystal's body. "I believe she will be discovered eventually," he responded. "Indeed." The next month, Jody Gilliland, the top deputy of the Nelson County Sheriff's Office, was appointed as the new lead detective. Crystal's family held a vigil in 2019 and stated that they think of her every day. People say it gets better, but it doesn't, according to her mother. Every day is challenging. The prayer vigil was held in Crystal's memory, but according to her family, it was also done to preserve her story in the hopes of learning more about her whereabouts. Pink, her favorite color, was prevalent. To wrap up the event, there were pink t-shirts, pink ribbons, and a pink balloon release. After all these years, Sherry Ballard said it made her happy to see the community still turn out to support her daughter. "No matter how long it takes, I will bring my daughter home," she continued. Sherry Ballard said that her family was close even before Crystal vanished. "The children have had a difficult time, but I don't want them to give up." Hope never fades because God works miracles. Regarding leads in the case, Sherry stated she has faith in the police to locate Crystal. On September 10, 2020, fresh testimony was heard in the custody case involving Crystal's youngest child, according to court documents. Judge Hayden refused Sherry Ballard's request for temporary visitation rights in October 2020. The child was not questioned by the court. According to Hayden's ruling, the child and Brooks have a strong bond. The judge characterized Brooks as a loving father. During legal proceedings, Brooks stated that the child exclusively interacts with him, his mother, and his new partner, Crystal Maupin, who is also named Crystal. Judge Hayden wrote, "Given their demonstrated hostility toward Brooks, the court is unconvinced they would be able to keep that vow, but it believes the testimony by Sherry Ballard was sincere and they would not do so on purpose." He went on, "It's safe to say that there's a big rift between the parties that will probably never get fixed." 5 years have passed since Crystal was last spotted in Bardstown in July 2020. Although her disappearance had attracted national attention, she was nowhere to be found and no answers had been found. Kylie, one of Crystal's 5 children, spoke with a radio station for the first time about her life without her mother. The inability to wake up every day and ask, "Hey Mom, what are you going to do today?" was expressed by Kylie. Similar to everyday small things, the little things are far more important than the large, important ones. It's the countless small things that she has been missing out on for the past 5 years. Kylie, who is now 19 years old, was only 14 when her mother vanished. she could still remember. She was not responding to my calls or texts. No one was able to contact her. She went on, saying that major life events like graduation are particularly difficult. Seeing all the kids with their mothers at my high school graduation made me feel really proud. It was difficult for me to see other mothers there, even though I knew my mother was proud, like I just wanted her to be there physically. After a day like that, Kylie said she writes to her mother in a journal almost every day. I'll be telling her this, and then on the very next page that this is really serious. You really ought to have attended. Like she's just right over my shoulder talking back and reading what I'm writing. The family has collected money over the years in exchange for information that helped Tommy Ballard and Crystal get arrested. By the time Kylie was 19, the reward had grown to $100,000. Until justice is served, Crystal's family had one simple request. Everybody keep praying and do not lose hope. You give us hope and you keep us going. Federal authorities announced in August 2020 that they were taking over the investigation in Crystal's disappearance, which led to a slew of searches at properties belonging to the Houck family. During the summer of 2020, the FBI took over from Kentucky State Police and the Nelson County Sheriff's Office as the lead investigator in the case, with over 150 federal agents serving search warrants at 3 sites owned by Houck and his family members. An FBI Louisville spokesman previously said all 3 locations had already been searched to various degrees over the years. The search took place in the Woodlawn Springs subdivision, where Brooks Houck's construction company built several houses shortly after the disappearance of Crystal. Federal agents, with the help from Nelson County Highway Department vehicles, were continuing to zero in on a driveway and tuck away pieces of concrete and materials from outside a home. A photographer of a local newspaper saw investigators using a jackhammer on the driveway of a home. Throughout the search, police were allowing only a few cars into the subdivision, and reporters were kept out. Crystal's mom commented on this search. I do not think they would just randomly pick a driveway unless they had a reason to do that. When my daughter went missing, Houck was building in that neighborhood. The FBI had not disclosed any details of their findings at this location, but on August 27, 2021, they did announce that an item of interest had been recovered from the concrete at one of the homes. During this most recent search, the FBI also stated that they know there are people in Bardstown who have information on this case and added that it was time for those people to come forward. One of the properties was the home of Brooks Houck, and another belonged to his brother Nick. On September 7, 2021, the FBI announced that the search in Bardstown had ended with several items of interest sent to a lab in Virginia for testing. Sherry told a local newspaper she had a lot of hope that her family will soon finally learn what happened to their daughter. She said, "And I do have a lot of hope that this is where the investigation needs to be at, and that they may be able to provide me answers this time." Regarding the thought of finally finding out what happened to her daughter, Sherry said, "I want it, but it is going to be so hard for me. I just hope that I can handle that when they come to meet me with the news, even though I have waited for 6 years. I need closure. Her kids need closure. And to physically hear it, it's going to be so hard on us." The FBI has not released more details on the items of interest that were sent to the Virginia lab for testing. FBI spokeswoman Katie Anderson told a newspaper in October 2021 the agency had nothing new to share on the Crystal Rogers investigation. In 2021, the FBI said it was also offering up a $25,000 reward for information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the individual or individuals responsible for Crystal's disappearance. Crystal's case remained unsolved. One reason was that it was turned over several times between agencies. Sherry Ballard said in an interview in 2022, her daughter's children were then 22, 21, 19, 17, and 9. Crystal was a very good girl. She was a very good daughter. She was nice to everyone she met. She even let a friend stay with her because the friend didn't have a place to go. That is the type of person she was. We are a pretty tight family, and I'm not doing anything unusual that any mother would do for their daughter at all. Crystal's mother stated, "I am just praying we will get some form of closure." She still remembers in vivid detail the day she went to the police station to report Crystal missing. "I recall them telling me it may be a year before we find any answers. And I was just surprised. I was simply like, there's no way I'm waiting a year to find my baby," Ballard said, choking back tears. In October 2022, the FBI started another search at Brooks Farm, this time for 5 days. Afterwards, they indicated they won't comment on exactly what was collected. The farm is held by the mother of Brooks Haupt. In January 2023, Attorney General Daniel Cameron appointed a special prosecutor to investigate Crystal's and her father's cases. On July 3, 2023, the 8th anniversary of her disappearance, the agency tweeted it made tremendous progress in bringing this case to its appropriate conclusion. "We continue to explore every available lead until those responsible for Crystal's disappearance are held accountable." On September 7, 2023, the investigation took an unexpected turn when it was stated that a suspect had been charged in connection to the crime. Joe Lawson is his name. At 32, he had never been mentioned in the media as a suspect or as having anything to do with Crystal's case. The arrest marked the first significant event in many years. Instead of being charged with Crystal's murder, Joseph Lawson is now facing a conspiracy charge. This indicates that the authorities think he had some role in the events that led to Crystal's alleged death, either through planning or execution. Her corpse was still missing. Lawson was also accused of tampering with physical evidence, which implies that Lawson may have deleted, covered up, changed, or manufactured tangible evidence in order to impede the official process. The charges of tampering with evidence were filed in June and conspiracy on July 24th, respectively, but they weren't scheduled since he was admitted to the hospital following the receipt of the indictments. Lawson made an appearance on Zoom during his Nelson Circuit Court arraignment. Following the reading of his indictment, the court accepted his not guilty plea. The indictment, which stated that the above-named defendant committed the crime of criminal conspiracy to end somebody's life on July 3, 2015 and/or July 4, 2015, did not specifically say Crystal. As a result, his bond was set at $500,000 in cash. When he and/or a co-conspirator purposefully took someone's life, and they did so with the intent to promote or facilitate the crime, he consented to assist one or more others in the preparation, execution, attempt, or solicitation of the murder. Lawson's attorney, Kevin Coleman, attested to the charge's relation to Crystal's case. He refused to offer any more remarks. Lawson is scheduled to return to court for a pretrial conference on October 26, 2023. Lawson has previously into a foul of the law. He has previously been charged with methamphetamine possession, burglary, trespassing, and assault. Investigators did not confirm whether Steve Lawson, who called Brooks Hawk the night Crystal vanished, is related to Joseph Lawson. However, a newspaper's check of public records revealed that Steve Lawson of Bardstown, Kentucky, is linked to Joseph Lawson. Their ages are same. After speaking with Till Ballard, Crystal's grandfather, a local newspaper was able to corroborate that Lawson's arrest was reported to relatives by the FBI. The elder Ballard expressed his belief that the two killings were connected. He expressed his optimism that his son's shooting incident will come to an end as a result of Crystal's arrest. Tommy was not going to give up on his search. Someone needed to halt him. I believe Lawson is also aware of Tommy. Lawson is being held, but his precise whereabouts are being kept secret in accordance with federal law. Eventually, on September 27, 2023, Brooks Hawk was taken into custody and accused of killing Crystal Rogers. The amount of his monetary bond is $10,000. Additionally, he is told not to communicate with Rogers' family. The FBI office stated in a release that its agents have been totally committed to holding those accountable who caused Crystal Rogers to vanish. We are taking a big step toward fulfilling that pledge today. On October 5, 2023, Hawk was arraigned. A trial date announcement is the next stage in the lawsuit. It's also anticipated that one more person might be taken into custody. This is what Sherry Ballard said when the arrest was made public. It would be an understatement to suggest that today was overpowering. She composed, "I have looked forward to this day for 8 horrifying years." Seeing Brooks Hawk placed in handcuffs seemed unreal to me. I knew he was guilty all along. Everyone will now be aware of that. I'm not even sure what feelings I had today. Most likely everyone you could think of, I believe. I must express my gratitude to the FBI. The moment they arrived at my door, God sent me an angel. I have first-hand knowledge of the effort and long, exhausting hours that one particular agent put into this case in order to make today possible. He never once forgot that I was a wife and mother going through the most terrible period a mother and wife could experience. The toll this had on him is beyond me. Without him, today would not have occurred. I appreciate all of the assistance he provided in his office. His colleagues put forth a lot of effort. They have my gratitude for watching out for my family and me. We also appreciate the Nelson County Sheriff's Office's help in making today possible. I express my gratitude to the prosecution attorney and his team. Thanks for watching.